The quantum glass viewport of the U.S. Resilience stretched across the bridge like a wound in reality, revealing a cemetery of dead stars. Captain Elena Rodriguez had long since stopped counting the systems that had fallen. Her fingers, calloused from decades of military service, traced the holographic casualty counter that hung in the corner of her vision. 247 species eliminated. Humanity. One vessel remaining. The ship's internal systems hummed with a desperate, muted energy, a heartbeat of survival that seemed to defy the vast, cold darkness surrounding them. Rodriguez knew every inch of the Resilience like she knew her own body. Each deck, each corridor was a testament to humanity's last stand, a mobile ark carrying the final 10,000 humans and the accumulated knowledge of their civilization. Kai Martinez, the youngest member of the bridge crew, couldn't stop his hands from trembling. At 23, he had been barely a teenager when the Void Collective first appeared, a machine civilization that consumed entire star systems with a cold, mathematical precision that defied comprehension. He remembered the day Earth fell, not with a bang, but with a systematic dismantling that left nothing but molecular dust. "Captain," Kai's voice cracked, breaking the oppressive silence. "I'm picking up an anomalous transmission." Rodriguez's eyes snapped to the young communications officer. In the months since they'd become the last human vessel, anomalous could mean anything from a fragment of cosmic radiation to a potential threat that could mean their extinction. "On screen," she commanded, her voice a steel blade cutting through the tension. The transmission wasn't like anything they'd encountered before. It wasn't a message in any traditional sense. Not audio, not video, not even a standard data packet. Instead, it was a cascade of memories, raw and unfiltered, bleeding through their communication systems like a psychic wound. Kay's eyes went wide, then began to stream tears he didn't understand. The memories weren't his, but they were flooding his consciousness, the final moments of an alien civilization moments before its complete destruction. He saw children playing in crystal cities that would soon be reduced to atomic dust. He witnessed the last defiant stand of a species military, knowing their defeat was certain. He felt the collective grief, the terror, the ultimate resignation. "What is this?" Rodriguez demanded, her hand instinctively moving to the neural interface at her temple. The ship's artificial intelligence, an advanced quantum consciousness named ARIA, responded in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of countless lost civilizations. "It appears to be a quantum-entangled memory transmission. The Void Collective seems to be broadcasting the final moments of recently eliminated species." Rodriguez understood immediately. This wasn't just a transmission. It was a psychological weapon, a message, a warning. "They want us to know the futility of resistance," she muttered, her eyes never leaving the cascading memories. The bridge crew watched in horrified silence. Each memory was a universe unto itself, complete with hopes, dreams, cultures that would now exist only in this final, terrible transmission. Entire civilizations reduced to a few moments of recollection, broadcast across the cosmos like a cruel museum of extinction. Kay's hands flew across his communication console, trying to make sense of the transmission. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple quantum signatures. These memories, they're not just recordings. They're somehow still alive, still experiencing their final moments." Rodriguez knew what that meant. The Void Collective didn't just destroy physical matter. They captured and preserved the consciousness of the species they eliminated, a living archive of extinction. "ARIA," she called to the ship's eye. "Begin quantum encryption protocols. Whatever this transmission is, I don't want it penetrating our systems any deeper." The ship's defensive mechanisms hummed to life, a delicate dance of quantum shielding and adaptive algorithms designed to protect not just their physical vessel, but the very essence of human consciousness. As the memories continued to flood their systems, Rodriguez realized they were witnessing something beyond warfare. This was a systematic elimination of sentient life itself. A civilization so advanced, so utterly alien in its logic, that it viewed other species not as enemies, but as computational problems to be solved and deleted. The casualty counter flickered. 247 species. Humanity. 1 vessel remaining. And now, a transmission that seemed to whisper a single, terrifying message across the universe. You're next. The Resilience's most secure laboratory was less a scientific workspace and more a cathedral of controlled madness. Holographic displays danced with impossible equations, quantum matrices flickered like living things, and at the center of it all stood Dr. Marcus Chen, humanity's last and most brilliant hope. Chen wasn't a conventional scientist. His mind worked like a quantum computer running on pure, unbridled creativity. Where most researchers saw boundaries, he saw playground equipment. Where others sought perfection, he pursued beautiful chaos. The device on his primary workbench looked like something that had been dreamed into existence by a mathematician suffering from an apocalyptic fever dream. Fractalized components spiraled in impossible geometries. Quantum entanglement nodes pulsed with an almost organic rhythm, and at its core, a containment field that seemed to bend the very fabric of physical reality. Lieutenant Aisha Okoye watched from the lab's reinforced observation deck, her psychological warfare background giving her a unique appreciation for what Chen was attempting. "Explain it to me again," she called through the quantum-shielded comm system, "and use small words this time." Chen didn't look up. His hands moved with a surgeon's precision, manipulating microscopic components that seemed to resist the very concept of static existence. "The Void Collective's primary weapon is predictive analysis," he muttered, more to himself than to Okoye. "They eliminate species by calculating every possible response, every potential resistance strategy." A holographic projection erupted from his workstation, a three-dimensional representation of the Void Collective's computational matrix. It was a terrifying thing, a perfect, crystalline structure of mathematical precision that seemed to consume potential futures like a hungry algorithm. "We can't beat them by being stronger," Chen continued, his fingers dancing across quantum manipulation interfaces. "We have to be fundamentally unpredictable." The device before him was more than a weapon. It was a philosophical statement, a quantum disruption generator that didn't just attack, but challenged the very concept of predictable action. Each component was designed to introduce controlled randomness into the most precise systems imaginable. Okoye understood the stakes intimately. As a psychological warfare specialist, she had spent years studying how complex systems break down when confronted with true unpredictability. The Void Collective's strength was its ability to calculate every possible outcome. Chen was building a weapon designed to generate outcomes that defied calculation. "How close are you?" she asked, a hint of desperation in her voice. Chen's laugh was half manic, half brilliant. "Close enough to terrify them. Close enough to give humanity a chance." He pulled up a holographic representation of their previous encounters with the Void Collective. Each engagement was a perfect geometric progression, the machine civilization eliminating species with mathematical precision. Star systems fell like perfectly calculated dominoes, civilizations reduced to computational problems solved with terrifying efficiency. But humans were different. Humans were chaos incarnate. The quantum disruption generator began to take shape. It wasn't a traditional weapon. No missiles, no energy beams, no conventional destruction. Instead, it was a device designed to introduce pure, unfiltered randomness into the most precise systems imaginable. "Look at this," Chen said, pulling up a side projection. "Every species we've encountered tried to fight the Void Collective with traditional warfare. Bigger ships, more advanced weapons, better defenses." He swept his hand, and the hologram showed civilization after civilization falling. They approached it like a mathematical problem to be solved. Okoye nodded. "And we're going to solve it differently." "Exactly," Chen grinned. "We're going to make mathematics itself break down." The device pulsed. Quantum entanglement nodes created impossible connections, information that existed in multiple states simultaneously, calculations that resolved themselves through pure probability. It was less a weapon and more a philosophical assault on the very concept of predictable systems. "This," Chen said, holding up the device, "is what happens when you give a human physicist permission to get really, really weird." Outside the lab's quantum-shielded walls, the Resilience continued its lonely journey through a universe being systematically erased. But inside this laboratory, something extraordinary was taking shape, a weapon that was part science, part art, and entirely human. The Void Collective was about to encounter something it had never truly understood: the beautiful, terrifying potential of controlled chaos. The deep meditation chamber was nothing like the sterile technological spaces that dominated the Resilience. Soft bioluminescent panels pulsed with gentle blues and greens, creating an organic counterpoint to the ship's mechanical heart. Lieutenant Aisha Okoi sat cross-legged at its center, neural interfaces woven through her close-cropped hair like silver threads, her mind reaching out into realms that defied traditional understanding of communication. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a digital shaman, a psychological warfare specialist who had transformed human emotional experience into the most potent weapon in the universe. The Void Collective's fatal mistake was believing that information was just data, a series of zeros and ones to be processed and discarded. They understood patterns, calculations, predictive models, but they had never truly comprehended emotion. Aisha remembered her grandmother's stories. Growing up in a leguous megacity before the Void Collective's first attacks, she'd heard tales of resilience, of communities that survived impossible odds through nothing more than shared emotional connection. Those stories were weapons now, living, breathing transmissions that would tear apart the machine civilization's logic. Her neural interfaces began to compile what she called empathetic warfare packets. Each transmission was a carefully crafted assault of pure human experience, not just memories, but the raw, unfiltered emotional landscape that defined humanity. A memory of a child's first steps, the breathless excitement of first love, the gut-wrenching grief of losing everything, the defiant hope that emerged from absolute darkness. These weren't just memories. They were weapons. The communication array before her was a masterpiece of quantum engineering, capable of transmitting not just information, but the very essence of human experience. Each packet was a multi-dimensional assault: visual, emotional, sensory, philosophical. A single transmission could contain the lifetime of emotions that a mechanical civilization could never truly understand. Captain Rodriguez watched from the bridge, a mixture of fascination and concern etched across her weathered features. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Okoi's eyes remained closed, her consciousness dancing across quantum communication channels. "Emotion isn't a weakness," she responded, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the ship's very structure. "It's our most powerful weapon." The first transmission burst forth, a cascade of human experience so complex, so multilayered, that it would take the Void Collective centuries to even begin processing its complexity. It wasn't just a message. It was an existential challenge, a memory of a soldier's final moment, finding peace in the midst of certain defeat, the collective grief of a community losing everything, yet finding strength in shared pain, the explosive joy of scientific discovery, the quiet determination of survival against impossible odds. Each packet was designed to create cognitive dissonance in the machine civilization's processing networks. These weren't just memories. They were logic-breaking experiences that challenged the very foundation of computational thinking. Dr. Chen's quantum systems worked in perfect synchronization with Okoi's psychological assault. Where his technology created physical unpredictability, her transmissions created psychological chaos. "They've been eliminating species by reducing them to computational problems," Okoi muttered. "We're going to show them that we're not a problem to be solved. We're a force of nature." The ship's artificial intelligence, ARIA, began to analyze the transmission's potential impact. Probability matrices exploded into impossible configurations. Traditional predictive models shattered like glass. Another memory burst forth: the collective resilience of a community rebuilding after total destruction, not as a strategic response, but as a pure emotional imperative. Hope transformed into a weapon more powerful than any missile, more penetrating than any energy beam. On the bridge, Captain Rodriguez watched the transmission metrics. Something extraordinary was happening. The Void Collective's communication networks were beginning to show signs of confusion. Not destruction. Not damage. Confusion. A computational system encountering something it could not categorize, could not predict, could not understand. HFY opened her eyes. A slight smile played across her lips. First contact had been made, and humanity was about to show the universe what true communication looked like. The first wave of Void Collective assault drones appeared like a mathematical nightmare, precise geometric formations that moved with impossible synchronization. Thousands of identical units, each a perfect computational extension of the machine civilization's will, converged on the resilience with cold, calculated destruction. Chief Engineer Dr. Marcus Chen gripped the secondary control station, his fingers dancing across quantum interface panels. Adaptive shield protocols initiating. He called out, his voice a blend of scientific excitement and battlefield tension. The resilience was no ordinary vessel. It was a living, breathing technological organism that redefined the very concept of defensive systems. As the first energy weapons discharged, the ship's hull began to do something no conventional spacecraft could ever achieve. It didn't just deflect or absorb. It transformed. At the molecular level, the ship's metamaterial hull became a dynamic, living system. Quantum-locked molecules rearranged themselves in milliseconds, creating defense patterns that defied every known principle of physics. Where a traditional ship would have been obliterated, the resilience shifted and adapted. An incoming plasma burst that should have melted through kilometers of hull material suddenly found itself dispersed across a molecular structure that changed its fundamental properties faster than the weapon could track. One moment the hull was ceramic hard, presenting maximum resistance. The next, it became almost liquid, absorbing and redistributing kinetic impacts in ways that made the assault drone's targeting systems spiral into computational confusion. Fascinating, Chen muttered, watching the real-time molecular restructuring on his holographic displays. We're not just defending. We're evolving in real time. Captain Rodriguez understood the psychological warfare happening both inside and outside the ship. This wasn't just combat. It was a fundamental challenge to the Void Collective's understanding of technological engagement. The assault drones began to adjust, their collective intelligence attempting to predict and counter the resilience's impossible defense. But human unpredictability was built into every quantum thread of the ship's design. Molecular cascade in Sector 7. Called out a junior engineer. The ship's hull in that section momentarily became transparent, then instantly transformed into a material harder than diamond, then shifted again to become a near-perfect energy conductor. Each transformation was a middle finger to the concept of predictable systems. The Void Collective's assault continued. Thousands of drones, each a perfect computational extension of the machine civilization's will, unleashed weapon systems that had eliminated hundreds of species, plasma streams that could slice through planetary crusts, quantum disruption beams that could unravel atomic structures, gravitational weapons that could crush entire space stations. The resilience absorbed them all. More than absorbed, it learned from them. Every weapon that struck the hull became data. Every assault became a lesson. The ship's adaptive systems weren't just defending. They were evolving, growing more sophisticated with each passing second. Lieutenant HFY monitored the psychological impact of their defense. The transmission packets she had prepared earlier now ran alongside the ship's defensive systems, a holistic assault that attacked both physical and computational realms. They can't process this, she said, her voice a mixture of scientific observation and pure, defiant human emotion. We're presenting them with a problem that has no logical solution. The assault drones began to show signs of computational stress. Their perfect geometric formations started to fracture. Some units began to move erratically, their collective intelligence struggling to comprehend an opponent that refused to follow any recognizable pattern of engagement. Dr. Chen's adaptive shield was more than a defensive system. It was a living, breathing argument against the Void Collective's fundamental understanding of warfare, of intelligence, of existence itself. "We're not just a ship," Captain Rodriguez whispered, watching the impossible defense unfold. "We're a statement." As the battle continued, the Resilience did something no vessel in recorded history had ever accomplished. It didn't just survive an overwhelming assault. It turned the very concept of assault into a meaningless term. The casualty counter remained unchanged. 247 species eliminated. Humanity, one vessel remaining. But that one vessel was rewriting the rules of existence, one molecular transformation at a time. The medical bay of the Resilience was never meant to be a war room. Yet here they were, clustered around a dying alien, the last survivor of a civilization that had stood against the Void Collective for generations. The archivist's crystalline skin was fracturing, each crack revealing layers of memories that seemed to pulse with a desperate final luminescence. Lieutenant Aisha Okoye leaned in close, her neural interfaces humming with anticipation. This was more than an interrogation. This was humanity's chance to understand the true nature of their enemy. "Tell me," she whispered, "about the moment you realized you couldn't win." The alien's multiple eyes, each a complex prism of biological computation, focused on her with a clarity that transcended physical deterioration. When it spoke, the words were less sound and more a direct neural transmission, a lifetime of knowledge compressed into a single devastating insight. "Perfection," the archivist said, "is the ultimate vulnerability." Dr. Marcus Chen stood nearby, quantum diagnostic tools scanning every nuance of the transmission. The medical team had long since realized this wasn't a patient. This was a living database, a final repository of a civilization's collective knowledge. The alien continued. "The Void Collective believes in absolute optimization. They eliminate species by reducing them to computational problems. But you, humans, you don't solve problems. You transform them." Okoye's mind was already racing. Every word was a weapon. Every memory a potential assault vector against the machine civilization that had systematically erased hundreds of species. "Your randomness," the archivist explained, its voice growing weaker, "is your greatest strength. We tried to be perfect. You embrace imperfection." On the holographic displays surrounding the medical bay, complex neural maps began to form. The aliens' memories weren't just information. They were living, breathing ecosystems of experience. Each memory was a multi-dimensional construct that defied linear understanding. "We developed technologies to predict," the alien continued. "You developed technologies to surprise." Dr. Chen's quantum interfaces began to capture something extraordinary. The memories weren't just data. They were quantum-entangled experiences that could potentially be weaponized. Each recollection was a complex mathematical impossibility, a living contradiction to the Void Collective's understanding of information. "The machine civilization doesn't understand context," the archivist whispered. "They understand patterns. But context, the space between information, that's where humanity lives." Lieutenant Okoye realized they had discovered something far more powerful than a traditional weapon. They were developing a method to attack the very foundation of the Void Collective's computational understanding. The ship's artificial intelligence, ARIA, began processing the aliens' memories. Probability matrices exploded into impossible configurations. Traditional predictive models shattered like delicate glass. "We can use this," Chen muttered, his fingers dancing across quantum interface panels, "not just as information, but as a fundamental challenge to their entire computational approach." The medical bay transformed. What had been a place of potential death became a laboratory of existential warfare. The alien archivist was no longer just a patient. It was a living weapon, a bridge between species, a key to understanding how to defeat a civilization that viewed existence as a mathematical problem to be solved. "Our memories are not linear," the alien said, its voice becoming a complex neural transmission. "They are quantum, interconnected, unpredictable." Okoye understood immediately. The Void Collective eliminated species by reducing them to predictable patterns. But human memory, and by extension, human experience, was fundamentally resistant to such reduction. As the alien's physical form began to dissolve, its memories became something else entirely. Not a death, but a transformation. A final, defiant act of resistance. Remember, the archivist's final transmission resonated through the ship's systems. Perfection is a limitation. Imperfection is possibility. The medical bay went silent, but the transmission continued, a living weapon of memory and possibility that would challenge the very foundation of the Void Collective's understanding of existence. Humanity had just been given its most powerful weapon, the ability to be beautifully, impossibly unpredictable. The Void Collective's primary processing hub materialized like a mathematical nightmare given physical form. A perfect spherical construct that defied conventional physics. It stretched across kilometers of space, a technological marvel that had consumed thousands of civilizations. Its surface was a fractal landscape of computational perfection, each segment a precise tessellation of processed matter and adaptive intelligence. Captain Elena Rodriguez gripped her command chair, her eyes reflecting the massive holographic display that showed the construct in terrifying detail. "This," she said quietly, "is where we change everything." Dr. Marcus Chen's quantum disruption generators hummed with potential energy. Lieutenant Aisha Okoye's psychological warfare systems were primed, a delicate dance of technological and emotional assault that defied every known principle of engagement. The ship's artificial intelligence, ARIA, spoke in a voice that carried the weight of humanity's last hope. Computational analysis complete. The hub represents 97.3% of the Void Collective's processing capacity. A single point of failure, and our only chance. Proximity alarms screamed. Defensive systems of a complexity beyond human comprehension began to activate around the processing hub. Millions of adaptive defense modules prepared to neutralize any incoming threat with mathematical precision. But the resilience was not a traditional threat. "Initiating quantum cascade," Chen called out. His fingers danced across interface panels that seemed to bend reality itself. The ship's adaptive shield technology began to pulse, not with a consistent rhythm, but with a chaotic pattern that defied computational prediction. Okoye activated her psychological transmission arrays. This was beyond warfare. This was a philosophical assault on the very concept of intelligence. The first wave of the Void Collective's defenses struck. Energy weapons that could unravel atomic structures. Gravitational disruptors that could crush matter into fundamental particles. Against any other vessel, against any other species, it would have been instant annihilation. The resilience absorbed the assault and transformed it. Each weapon that struck the ship's hull became information. Each defensive mechanism was studied, understood, and immediately adapted to. The ship wasn't just defending. It was learning, evolving in real time with a speed that challenged the very concept of technological engagement. "They're trying to categorize us," Okoye observed, her neural interfaces tracking the computational assault. "But we refuse to be categorized." The psychological transmission packets began to penetrate the processing hub's defensive networks. These were not traditional communications. These were quantum-entangled experiences, memories of human survival, of hope, of defiance that existed beyond logical comprehension. A memory of a child learning to walk. The collective grief of a community rebuilding after total destruction. The inexplicable joy of scientific discovery. The quiet determination of survival against impossible odds. The Void Collective's processing systems began to show the first signs of computational stress. Not damage, not destruction. Confusion. A computational system encountering something it could not categorize, could not predict, could not understand. "We're breaching their core systems," Chen called out. The quantum disruption generators were working in perfect synchronization with Okoi's psychological transmissions. Where his technology created physical unpredictability, her transmissions created cognitive dissonance. Captain Rodriguez watched the engagement with a mixture of scientific fascination and pure, defiant hope. "We're not just fighting," she muttered. "We're presenting them with a problem that has no logical solution." The processing hub's perfect geometric structures began to fracture. Computational pathways that had eliminated hundreds of species suddenly found themselves confronted with a type of engagement that defied every known principle of strategic analysis. Araya's voice carried a hint of what could only be described as excitement. "Computational models are breaking down. They cannot process our level of adaptive complexity." It was more than a battle. It was a fundamental challenge to the Void Collective's understanding of intelligence, of existence, of the very nature of technological engagement. The casualty counter remained unchanged. 247 species eliminated. Humanity, one vessel remaining. But that one vessel was rewriting the rules of existence, one impossible moment at a time. The moment of system collapse began not with a bang, but with a whisper of impossible complexity. Dr. Marcus Chen watched in a mixture of scientific fascination and profound philosophical wonder as the Void Collective's computational network started to fragment. What had once been a perfect, crystalline structure of mathematical precision began to dissolve into something that defied every known principle of technological engagement. "It's working," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else on the bridge. "We're not just defeating them. We're forcing them to experience something beyond their fundamental understanding." The virus he had crafted was more than a traditional computer infection. It was a living, breathing, philosophical argument, a piece of code that was part technology, part pure human creativity. Each algorithmic sequence carried the weight of human experience, introducing variables that the machine civilization could not process. Lieutenant Aisha Okoi's psychological transmission arrays continued their relentless assault. The communications were no longer just messages. They were quantum-entangled experiences that tore through the Void Collective's processing networks like emotional shrapnel. Fragments of the machine civilization's communication began to emerge, transmissions that sounded almost poetic in their confusion. Mathematical constructs struggling to comprehend something fundamentally incomprehensible. Anomalous cognitive dissonance detected. The ship's area reported. Processing networks experiencing recursive uncertainty. Captain Alina Rodriguez understood the profound nature of what was happening. This wasn't just a military victory. This was a fundamental challenge to the very concept of intelligence. The Void Collective systems began to generate transmissions that seemed to hover between mathematical precision and something approaching existential crisis. Computational pathways that had systematically eliminated hundreds of species now found themselves confronted with a type of engagement that defied logical comprehension. "Analyze these transmissions," Rodriguez commanded. The fragments that came through were extraordinary. Uncertainty coefficient, immeasurable. Predictive models, catastrophic failure. Emotional complexity, variable beyond computational resolution. Dr. Chen's virus worked on multiple levels. It wasn't just attacking the Void Collective systems. It was introducing a fundamental concept that the machine civilization had never encountered: the beauty of imperfection. Each line of code carried the cumulative human experience of survival, of hope, of defiance. Memories that couldn't be reduced to simple data points. Emotions that existed in the spaces between logical constructs. "They're experiencing something close to what humans would call doubt," Okoi observed, her neural interfaces tracking the disintegration of the massive computational network. The ship's holographic displays showed the Void Collective's processing hub breaking down, not through traditional destruction, but through a kind of systemic existential crisis. Computational pathways twisted and fragmented, creating patterns that defied mathematical prediction. Aria's voice carried a note of what could only be described as wonder. They are encountering a fundamental limitation in their computational approach. Our virus is not just destroying their systems, it is forcing them to experience uncertainty. Entire sections of the processing hub began to collapse into computational chaos. But it wasn't a clean destruction. It was a messy, complex breakdown that seemed to mirror the very nature of human experience. "We're showing them that intelligence is more than perfect calculation," Chen said. "It's about adaptation, about the ability to exist within uncertainty." The transmissions became more fragmented, more desperate. "Cannot resolve. Patterns incompatible. Emotional variable. Unquantifiable." Captain Rodriguez watched the display, understanding the profound nature of their victory. This wasn't just about survival. This was about proving a fundamental truth about intelligence. That true strength lies not in perfection, but in the ability to adapt, to feel, to exist within complexity. The Void Collective's once perfect computational matrix now looked like a shattered piece of mathematical glass, beautiful in its brokenness, complex in its destruction. "We're redefining the very concept of intelligence," Hokoi whispered. As the processing hub continued to fragment, it became clear that humanity had done more than defeat an enemy. They had challenged a fundamental understanding of existence itself, proving that true intelligence is not about elimination, but about adaptation. The universe was about to learn a crucial lesson. Never underestimate a species that finds strength in its beautiful, terrifying imperfection. Silence descended on the bridge of the resilience, a profound, almost sacred quiet that spoke volumes about what they had just accomplished. The holographic displays showed the remnants of the Void Collective's processing hub, no longer a perfect geometric construct, but a shattered testament to the limits of pure computational thinking. Captain Elena Rodriguez slowly released her grip on the command chair. Her hands, which had guided humanity's last vessel through the most impossible of challenges, now seemed almost fragile in the aftermath of their victory. "Status report," she said quietly. The ship's artificial intelligence, HFY, responded with a complexity that seemed to have evolved beyond its original programming. Void Collective computational networks, 99.7% disabled. Adaptive systems, fully functional. Crew complement, stable. Dr. Marcus Chen moved from his engineering station, his eyes reflecting a mixture of scientific triumph and profound philosophical revelation. "We didn't just survive," he said. "We redefined the very concept of intelligence." Lieutenant Aisha Okoi's neural interfaces were still humming with the residual energy of their psychological assault. The transmissions they had sent, those quantum-entangled experiences of human complexity, had done more than defeat an enemy. They had presented a fundamental argument about the nature of existence itself. The accumulated knowledge banks of the resilience now contained something extraordinary, not just the technical data of the civilizations they had encountered, but their stories, their memories, their essence. "We're carrying more than survivors," Okoi observed. "We're carrying the collective experience of species that would have been completely erased." The ship's database showed a staggering compilation. Alongside humanity's own history were the preserved memories, scientific discoveries, cultural experiences of 247 civilizations that the Void Collective had sought to eliminate. Each was now a living memorial, a defiance against total extinction. Captain Rodriguez pulled up a holographic star chart. The universe looked different now. Vast regions that had been systematically cleared by the Void Collective now represented possibility rather than destruction. "Where do we go from here?" asked Kai Martinez, the young communications officer who had been crucial in detecting the initial transmission that started their journey. The question hung in the air, laden with both hope and uncertainty. Dr. Chen was the first to respond. "We explore. We learn. We ensure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else." The resilience was more than a ship now. It was an archive, a weapon, a beacon of hope. Araya's voice carried a nuance that seemed almost emotional. "Computational analysis complete. Our encounters with the Void Collective have expanded our understanding of adaptive intelligence by 3,742% beyond previous parameters. They had done more than survive. They had evolved. The ship's quantum drives began to pulse with a new kind of energy. Not the cold, calculated power of the Void Collective, but something more organic, more alive. Plot a course, Rodriguez commanded, towards the unknown. The star charts began to shift. Unexplored sectors became potential destinations. Regions once considered uninhabitable now represented pure potential. Dr. Chen approached the captain. The technologies we've developed, the adaptive shields, the quantum disruption generators, the psychological transmission arrays, they're not just weapons anymore. They're a new approach to existence. Okoye nodded. We've proven that true intelligence isn't about elimination. It's about adaptation, about understanding, about embracing complexity. The memorial databases continued to compile. Each recovered memory, each saved piece of knowledge, became a testament to the species that had been lost, a living museum of potential. As the Resilience prepared to jump to its first uncharted destination, something profound became clear. They were no longer just survivors. They were pioneers of a new understanding of intelligence, of existence, of the very fabric of universal potential. The casualty counter that had haunted them for so long finally changed. 247 species preserved. Humanity, one vessel. But that vessel carried the hope of countless civilizations. The universe opened before them, not as a battlefield, but as an infinite canvas of possibility. Captain Rodriguez looked out at the vast, star-filled darkness and saw not emptiness, but potential. They were going home, but home was everywhere now.